Now, there's a lot going on, and I think we've all had a really tough couple of weeks, especially with the Brett Kavanaugh stuff. The fact that that guy is on the Supreme Court is downright depressing, but it should also be energizing because now we have a number of missions in front of us, and I do want to talk about that. But right now, I want to start by talking about a story that got kind of overlooked, and I think it's really important for today's political debate, even though it harks back to a long time ago, about nearly 60 years ago. It's a story about the Vietnam War. It was reported in the New York Times. New cables have been unearthed. You know, that's how they communicated internationally back in those days. And they showed that General William Westmoreland, who was in charge of the Vietnam War under President Johnson, wanted to use nuclear weapons, or at least to have them available if they lost a major battle, the Battle of Khe Sanh. Now, this is a big deal, as I say, for today as well as history. We've had Daniel Ellsberg on talking about doomsday thinking and the doomsday machine, which is the name of his book. We've talked about the risks of accidental nuclear conflict, but we haven't talked enough, I think, about the fact that war, as the old saying goes, is way too important to be left to the generals. Now, just to give you a little detail on this story, the American commander in the Pacific asked General Westmoreland, who was the big boss, if they could put together a secret operation called Fracture Jaw that involved moving nuclear weapons into South Vietnam, which was our ally, so that they could be used on short notice against troops from North Vietnam. And the idea would be that if American troops were about to lose the Battle of Khe Sanh, this was in 1968, basically they'd nuke them. Eventually this got to President Johnson's national security advisor through a young assistant. The national security advisor told President Johnson, and Johnson said, "No deal. You're not going to get the nuclear weapons. There aren't any now, and there never will be nuclear weapons in the Vietnam area." Now, this is something that was said, historians said, about that whole encounter. Quote, "Johnson never fully trusted his generals. He had great admiration for General Westmoreland, but he didn't want his generals to run the war." Now, skepticism about generals is a healthy thing, and it's one that we should have today. I think too many of us are counting on the generals to keep Donald Trump at bay, because you know, and I know, that nowadays if an American general asked for a nuclear weapon for any purpose, the current president in the White House would be all too likely to give that general the nuclear weapon, and that general might very well use it. Now, there were a lot of things that were both bloodthirsty and incredibly stupid. I don't happen to share President Johnson's admiration for General Westmoreland based on my reading of the history of the war. And just a slight personal anecdote, my parents went to a testimonial dinner for General Westmoreland after he returned from Vietnam, and they had to go. And my mother was the only one who didn't stand up, because she said he seemed like a stupid man from the way he conducted the war. He seemed even stupider after she heard him talk, and she wasn't going to stand up for him. And I kind of stick with Mom on that one. Now, one of the reasons my mom had that skepticism was that she was with the USO in Japan, so she'd been around generals. She knew what generals were like. A lot of people who fought in World War II really had a healthy skepticism of generals, saw them as political players, ambitious, out for themselves, and I think there's still a lot of truth to that. You don't get to be a top-level executive in any organization, peacetime or military, without being that kind of a player and rolling in that way. So all I'm saying to you, I guess, is let's not idealize the people. We can honor our troops for the sacrifices they make, but let's not idealize the guys, and they are largely guys, who are in charge, because you know they're people who can have serious lapses of judgment. That's why we have civilian oversight of the military. We ought to keep it that way. General Mattis is not going to save us. No other general is going to save us. We're going to save us by electing better officials than the ones we've got running things now. That includes the President of the United States. It also includes the Republicans who run both houses of Congress, who are far too willing to give these people any weapon they want. That's got to stop too.